ACDC was born from the two brothers. Malcolm and Angus Young were Scottish immigrants in Australia. They had rock and roll in their blood. Their older brother, George, had already found fame with the easy beats. Malcolm, the quiet one, played rhythm guitar with a powerful driving force. He was the engine room of the band. Angus, the younger brother, was a showman from the start. He wore a schoolboy uniform on stage. He ducked and weaved, a blur of energy. He played lead guitar like a man possessed. Together, they were unstoppable. They knew exactly what kind of band they wanted to be. They found their singer in a man named Bon Scott. Bon was older than the young brothers. He had been in other bands before. He had lived a hard life and had the stories to prove it. His voice was raw and full of character. It was the perfect match for the band's loud, bluesy rock. Bon wrote lyrics that were clever and often cheeky. He sang about life on the road, about women, and about having a good time. He was a poet of the streets. With Bon at the front, the classic ACDC lineup was taking shape. They added Mark Evans on bass and Phil Rudd on drums. The machine was ready to roll. The band worked hard. They played in pubs and clubs all over Australia. Their live shows became legendary. They were loud, sweaty, and dangerous. Angus would run through the crowd, his guitar screaming. Bon would command the stage, a bottle in his hand and a grin on his face. They built a loyal following, one gig at a time. They released their first two albums, High Voltage and TNT, in Australia. These records captured their raw energy. They were a statement of intent. ACDC was here to play rock and roll, and they were going to play it louder than anyone else. Their ambition was bigger than just Australia. They wanted to conquer the world. They signed an international deal with Atlantic Records. They moved to London in 1976. This was a huge step for them. They were leaving their home behind to chase a dream. Life in London was tough at first. They lived in cheap flats and played in small venues, but they didn't give up. They had a belief in their music that was unshakable. They were outsiders, a gang of Aussies ready to take on the world. Their sound was a breath of fresh air in a music scene full of punk and prog rock. They were simple, direct, and powerful. In the middle of 1976, ACDC went back into the studio. They were ready to record their third album. The band was on a creative roll. They had been touring relentlessly, and their sound was tighter than ever. They returned to Albert Studios in Sydney, Australia. This was their home turf. They worked again with producers Harry Vander and George Young. George was Malcolm and Angus's older brother. He understood the band's sound better than anyone. He knew how to capture their raw power on tape. The sessions were fast and focused. The band knew what they wanted to achieve. The result was Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. The album was a collection of tough, gritty rock and roll songs. The music was simple, but incredibly effective. Malcolm Young's rhythm guitar was the foundation. It was a solid wall of sound. Phil Rudd's drumming was powerful and steady, locking in perfectly with the bass. Over this, Angus Young's lead guitar soared and screamed. His solos were fast, frantic, and full of bluesy feel. The band played as one tight unit. They weren't trying to be clever or complicated. They were trying to hit you right between the eyes with pure, undiluted rock. Bon Scott's lyrics were the icing on the cake. The title track, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, was a perfect example. It was a dark, funny story about a hitman for hire. Bon sang it with a wink and a sneer. Other songs were just as memorable. Problem Child was a defiant anthem for anyone who ever felt like an outcast. Ride On was a slow, sad blues song. It showed a different side to the band. It was a song about loneliness and regret. Bon's voice was full of genuine emotion. The album was a snapshot of the band's world, a world of cheap thrills, long nights, and the dream of escape. The overall sound of the album was raw and unpolished. It felt live and dangerous. Vander and Young didn't try to smooth over the rough edges. They embraced them. They knew that the band's power was in its raw energy. The guitars were loud and distorted. The drums hit hard. Bon's voice was right up front in the mix. You could hear every breath, every growl. Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap wasn't a pretty album. It was an album with dirt under its fingernails. It was the sound of a band that didn't care about being polite. They just wanted to rock. and they did. ACDC delivered the finished album to their American record label, Atlantic Records. They were proud of their work. They thought it was their best album yet. They expected the label to be excited. They were ready for their big break in the United States. The American market was the biggest in the world. A hit album there could make them superstars. The band waited for the good news. They waited for the release date. But the news that came back was not what they wanted to hear. It was a crushing blow. The label was not going to release the album. The executives at Atlantic Records in New York listened to Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, and they hated it. They thought the production was poor. They said it sounded raw and unfinished. They didn't understand the band's sound. They were used to polished, radio-friendly rock. ACDC was the opposite of that. The label also had a big problem with Bon Scott's voice. They thought it was strange and unappealing. One executive famously asked if the singer had a problem. They couldn't imagine his voice being played on American radio. They just didn't get it. The lyrical content was another major issue for the label. They thought the songs were too vulgar. The title track, with its theme of contract killing, was seen as promoting violence. Songs like Big Balls were considered too juvenile and silly. The label was worried about controversy. They were scared that radio stations would refuse to play the songs. They were concerned that parents' groups would protest. They saw the album as a commercial risk. They didn't believe it could sell. For them, music was a business, and this album looked like a bad investment. So, Atlantic Records made a decision. They shelved the album. They refused to release it in the United States. For ACDC, this was a huge setback. They couldn't believe it. They had poured their hearts and souls into the record. They knew the songs were good. They knew their fans would love them. To be rejected like this was insulting. It felt like the label had no faith in them. The band was angry and frustrated. They were stuck in a kind of limbo. They had an album they couldn't release in the most important market in the world. It was a dark time for the young band. While the American label said no, the story was different elsewhere. ACDC's international label had a different view. The album was released in Australia in September 1976. The band was already huge in their home country. Their fans were hungry for new music. The album was an immediate success. It shot up the charts and became another big hit for them. For Australian fans, Dirty Deeds was simply the next chapter in the story of their favourite band. They loved the raw energy and the cheeky lyrics. The rejection in America seemed a world away. The album also got a release in the United Kingdom and Europe. It came out in November 1976. ACDC had been touring hard in the UK. They were building a strong following. The British music press was starting to pay attention. They saw ACDC as a powerful live act. The release of Dirty Deeds helped to solidify their reputation. It wasn't a massive chart topper overnight, but it sold steadily. It found its way into the hands of rock fans who were looking for something honest and exciting. The album's gritty sound connected with the mood of the time. The reception from critics outside the US was generally positive. They recognized the power and energy of the band. They praised the simple, effective songwriting. They saw the humor in Bon Scott's lyrics. They understood that ACDC wasn't trying to be sophisticated. They were a rock and roll band, pure and simple. In a world of complex progressive rock and angry punk, ACDC offered something different. They offered a good time. The album helped build their fan base across Europe, one country at a time. It was a slow burn, but the fire was spreading. The album that was released in Australia was slightly different from the international version. The track list was not the same. The Australian version included the songs R.I.P., Rock in Peace, and Jailbreak. The international version replaced these with Rocker and Love at First Feel. This meant that fans in different parts of the world experienced the album in different ways. But the core of the record remained the same. It was a statement of intent from a band that refused to compromise. The world was starting to listen, even if America wasn't ready yet. Section 5. The singles. Spreading the word, one song at a time. So, from the international version of the album, there were two main singles that were really pushed to the public. The first was the title track, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. You know, the song's catchy chorus and dark, humorous story made it an obvious choice. In Australia, it actually became a significant hit. It captured the public's imagination and really helped drive album sales. The song's rebellious spirit resonated with young fans, and it was just a perfect anthem for a band that played by its own rules. The single's success in their home country proved that the band knew exactly what their audience wanted, even if the American record executives did not. Now, the second single released in many territories was Love at First Feel. Interestingly, this song wasn't even on the original Australian version of the album. It was added specifically for the international release. It was a slightly more commercial-sounding track, with a catchy riff and a classic rock and roll theme. The label probably hoped this song would have a better chance of getting radio play. And while it didn't become a massive worldwide smash hit, it performed respectably in several countries. It helped introduce the band to new listeners who might have been put off by their harder-edged material. Another key track, Jailbreak, was a huge single in Australia. It was actually released before the album even came out there. The song had this dramatic story and a powerful marching rhythm. The band even made a famous music video for it, showing them breaking out of a prison. This song was a real fan favorite and a staple of their live shows for years. However, for most of the world, Jailbreak was kind of a hidden gem. It wasn't included on the international version of the album. So many fans outside Australia wouldn't hear the song until years later. You know, the success of the singles really varied from country to country. In the UK, the singles didn't make a huge dent in the pop charts, since the UK charts at the time were dominated by punk and new wave. But the songs definitely found their audience on rock radio stations and in clubs. They helped build the band's reputation as a must-see live act. Each single was like a small advertisement for the band's raw power. They weren't chart-topping hits in the traditional sense. Instead, they were seeds planted in the fertile ground of the global rock scene. And these seeds would grow slowly and steadily over the next few years. Years passed. ACDC refused to be beaten by the rejection from Atlantic Records. They kept touring and making albums. They released Let There Be Rock, Powerage, and the classic live album If You Want Blood, You've Got It. Their fan base grew larger and more dedicated with each release. Then came 1979's Highway to Hell. This album was their big breakthrough. It was a massive international hit, even in America. It seemed like ACDC was finally on top of the world, but tragedy struck. In February 1980, their iconic singer, Bon Scott, passed away. The band was devastated. They thought about quitting, but they decided to carry on, believing it's what Bon would have wanted. They found a new singer, a man from Newcastle named Brian Johnson. His powerful, screaming voice was different from Bon's, but it fit the band's sound perfectly. They went to the Bahamas to record a new album. That album was Back in Black. Released in July 1980, it was more than just a comeback. It was a phenomenon. It became one of the best-selling albums of all time. AC/DC were no longer just a big rock band. They were global superstars. Suddenly, Atlantic Records had a problem. They had a huge back catalogue of AC/DC albums. But there was one missing piece in their American collection: Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. With the astronomical success of Back in Black, fans were desperate for more AC/DC music. New fans who had discovered the band through Brian Johnson wanted to hear the old material with Bon Scott. There was a massive, untapped demand for the very album that the label had once called garbage. The album was being sold as an expensive import in record shops. The label was missing out on a lot of money. The decision was purely a business one. The label that had once rejected the album for being uncommercial now saw a golden opportunity. They knew that if they released Dirty Deeds now, it would sell millions of copies. The success of Back in Black provided the perfect marketing tool. The timing was perfect. So, in March 1981, 5 years after it was recorded, Atlantic Records finally released Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap in the United States. The album they had hidden away in a vault was now being pushed as a major release from the biggest rock band in the world. AC/DC was not happy. The band, especially Malcolm and Angus Young, felt betrayed by the label's decision. They saw it as a cynical cash grab. For 5 years, they had lived with the insult of the rejection. They had been told their music wasn't good enough for America. They had been told their singer was no good. Now, only because another album had made them rich and famous, the label wanted to profit from the record they had once despised. It felt deeply disrespectful, not just to the band, but to the memory of Bon Scott. The timing of the release particularly angered them. They were touring the world in support of Back in Black. They were trying to establish Brian Johnson as their new frontman. They were looking to the future, but the record label was forcing them to look back. The release of Dirty Deeds shifted the media's focus back to the Bon Scott era. It created confusion for new fans. It felt like the label was undermining their efforts to move forward with their new singer. The band wanted the world to embrace the new ACDC, but the industry was busy selling the old one. The Young Brothers have never been a band to hide their feelings. They spoke out about their frustration in interviews. They made it clear that the release was done without their approval. They saw it as the worst kind of music industry hypocrisy. First, the label had no faith in them. Then, when they became successful on their own terms, the same label wanted to take advantage of that success. It confirmed everything they already believed about the business side of music. It was all about money. Art and loyalty meant nothing. This experience hardened the band's attitude towards the music industry. It strengthened their resolve to control their own destiny. They had always been a self-contained unit, a gang against the world. This incident just reinforced that mindset. They trusted themselves, their music, and their fans. They did not trust the suits in the record company offices. The delayed release of Dirty Deeds became a symbol of their long fight for respect. It was a battle they had eventually won, but it left a bitter taste in their mouths that would linger for years to come. Today, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap is regarded as a classic AC/DC album. It represents the band at its rawest and most rebellious. For many fans, especially those who were there in the early days, it is the definitive Bon Scott era record. It captures his unique personality perfectly. The street poet, the rogue, the rock and roll outlaw. The songs have stood the test of time. Tracks like the title song, Problem Child, and Ain't No Fun, Waiting Round to Be a Millionaire, are still fan favorites. They are anthems of defiance and frustration that still resonate with listeners today. The album's controversial reputation has only added to its legend. The fact that it was banned in America for so long makes it seem more dangerous and exciting. It's the album the man didn't want you to hear. This story is now a key part of the AC/DC mythos. It highlights their struggle against the music industry and their ultimate triumph. The album's raw sound, which the label initially hated, is now celebrated by critics. It is seen as a perfect example of stripped-down, no-frills hard rock. It is honest, direct, and powerful, with no studio tricks to hide behind. Over the years, the album has continued to cause some controversy. In the 1980s, the title track was linked by the media to the crimes of a serial killer in California. This led to negative press and accusations that the band's music was a bad influence. The band always denied these claims, stating that their lyrics were just stories and rock and roll fantasy. This controversy, however, only cemented the album's reputation as a piece of forbidden fruit. It made the album even more appealing to young fans who were looking for music that would annoy their parents. For critics, the album is often seen as a crucial turning point for the band. It's the moment where the songwriting of Young and Scott truly came into its own. The album is a mix of hard-hitting rockers and slower, bluesier numbers like Ride On. This track, in particular, is often singled out for praise. It shows a more vulnerable and reflective side of Bon Scott. It proves that there was more to the band than just loud guitars and cheeky jokes. Dirty Deeds is a complex, influential record that showcases a great band hitting its creative stride. When Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap was finally released in the US in 1981, its success was staggering. It entered the American album charts and climbed all the way to number 3. This was an incredible achievement for an album that was 5 years old. It rode the massive wave of popularity created by Back in Black. To date, the album has sold over 6 million copies in the United States alone. This makes it a multi-platinum success. The record that Atlantic Records once thought was a commercial failure has become one of their biggest-selling catalog albums. The album's influence can be heard in the music of countless bands that followed. Many famous artists have cited Dirty Deeds as a major inspiration. Guns N' Roses, for example, were huge fans. They even covered the title track and released it on their 1988 EP, GNR Lies. Their guitarist, Slash, has often spoken about how Angus Young's playing on this album influenced his own style. The raw, street-level attitude of the album was a clear blueprint for the sound and image of bands that emerged from the Los Angeles rock scene in the 1980s. Other musicians have also paid tribute to the album. Dee Ramone, the bassist and primary songwriter for the punk band The Ramones, was a big fan. He loved the title track so much that he named one of his solo projects D.D. King and recorded a rap song called Funky Man, where he talks about listening to ACDC. The album's simple, powerful approach to rock and roll has inspired artists across many genres, from heavy metal to punk rock. It proved that you didn't need to be technically fancy to be powerful. Attitude and a great riff were all that mattered. Decades after its troubled birth, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap stands tall as a pillar of the ACDC catalogue. It is a testament to the band's stubborn belief in their own music. It is a monument to the unique talent of Bon Scott. The album's journey from rejected demo to multi-platinum classic is one of rock and roll's greatest success stories. It's a story of how a band from Australia took on the world and won on their own terms. The executives who rejected it are long forgotten, but the songs on Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap will be played as long as there is rock and roll.